What is going on, Jet fans? Matt O'Leary back with another video, a huge one today, as this is the New York Jets full 2024 season preview and predictions show. I will go through my expectations for the New York Jets. I will do stat predictions as well. It's a really deep dive episode into everything you need to know about the New York Jets, and we'll get into my postseason predictions as well and Super Bowl predictions from there. So before we get into any of the stat line predictions that I expect to see for the 2024 season, got to do a little bit of a precursor. As we know, the amount of pressure on the New York Jets for this season is immense. Why? Well, you have Aaron Rodgers returning from the injury, and it's really time for both Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas to finally win games. Robert Saleh is entering year 4. Joe Douglas is entering year 6 as the GM of the New York Jets. There is context to why both guys have stuck around so long without the actual success on the field, but that context kind of goes out the window this year because no matter what happens, this team has to end up a playoff team. And that's kind of where I want to start. So in my opinion, my baseline for what the Jets have to do this year is they have to be a playoff team and they have to win a playoff game, I'd say. Now this is a very eye test thing. I have to see it before I go, okay, yeah, they got to come back. But what I'm talking about is if the Jets limp into the playoffs, let's say they're 9-8, they're the 7th seed, and then they get run out of the building by Kansas City, Baltimore, something like that in the wild card round. That's not enough to me to say, yeah, that was a really resounding success. Now, at the same time, if the Jets, win the division and they win a home playoff game and then have to go on the road to Kansas City and they lose and they don't win a Super Bowl, I can't possibly sit here and tell you how that's an abject failure of a season after the Jets have gone 13 straight years without making the playoffs. So there's a barometer. Do I want the Jets to win the Super Bowl? Of course. But if they don't, am I going to sit here and tell you that it was this absolute massive failure of a season? I'm not. I'm really not. I'm be disappointed. I'll be sad, but I can't put that kind of that bar on this season because I don't want to then be like, well, I can't enjoy the 2024 season even though they won 12 games, let's say, and won a playoff game for the first time in forever and it was really fun regular season and they won a playoff game or two. They're like, well, they didn't win it all. So failure. I can't go there. If you can, okay, that's your prerogative, I guess. I kind of said in past episodes in the podcast Just Jets this week that it's a legacy season for Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, Aaron Rodgers, obviously. And I think you got to throw Nathaniel Hackett in there too. But focusing on the head coach and just coaching in general here before we get into our stat line predictions, Robert Saleh has to improve this year. The areas in which I think he needs to improve are in-game management, for instance, taking timeouts, when to get aggressive, things like that. And I think we need to see the team up for more important games. So over the last 2 years, the Jets have started out hot and then got ice cold at the end of the year. We've seen them show up, or no show, actually is a better way to say it, no show really important games the last 2 years. Their season was still technically alive against the Dolphins last year, run out of the building. Their season was still technically alive a couple years ago against, we could do a couple, the Jacksonville game or really the Seattle game on the road, 6 out a ton, no showed for. And a lot has to do with quarterback play, which is why I want to see Robert Saleh with a legitimate quarterback this year. But moral of the story, again, there's no excuses and we have to see some improvement with that also improved quarterback play. All right, it's time to get into the predictions. Now, this is very important. So everything kind of has to match up for me. And what I mean by that, if I predict, let's say, Aaron Rodgers to throw for, we'll use baseline number, 4,000 yards. Then when I get to the receivers, all that has to add up to 4,000 yards. And it's challenging to do, by the way. And I think that some people are going to be disappointed by some of the output, spoiler, but when I talk through it, I think it'll all end up making sense in the end. So stick with me to the end here if you could. But we will start with the passing offense and with Aaron Rodgers, who I know we are all excited to see in a New York Jets uniform. Most importantly, Aaron Rodgers playing 17 games this year. Maybe that's my hot take for this season, but I think he comes back with a lot to prove. Hopefully, maybe he plays like 16 because he's resting in the final week, but I'm just giving Rodgers predictions in this one. I have him attempting 558 passes, which, by the way, would be 22nd in the NFL based off last year's numbers, but with 376 completions for a completion percentage of 67.4%. I have him at 4,092 yards, so just over 4,000 yards, which that would rank him 10th in the NFL, 7.3 yards per attempt. 29 touchdown passes would have put him 7th. And I will say 8 interceptions on the season. All that comes out to a 100.1 passer rating. Now, is that MVP All-Pro Aaron Rodgers? No, it's not. It's not, 40 touchdowns, 2 picks. It's not, anything insane. But is that a really, really good season? Yes, that is a very good season. And as you could tell by my passing numbers, I think the Jets are going to be a run-heavy team. I have them, if you do the per-game pace for Aaron Rodgers' numbers, he's attempting like 32.8. We can round up to 33 passing attempts a game on average. Sometimes I think it'll be a little bit more than that. Sometimes I think, depending on circumstance, it'll be less than that, and averaging about 240.7 yards per game. Again, sometimes I think it'll be a little bit more. Sometimes I think it'll be a little bit less. This is a good season. Those numbers are good enough to be right around fringe top 10, somewhere between the 8th to 12th best quarterback. That's what I think the Jets need from Aaron Rodgers to have a successful season. If they get anything more than that, great. That's a bonus. If they get anything less than that, they're probably still a playoff team. But I think where we see Rodgers come is the difference between the difference of his MVP seasons and his last year in Green Bay. I think he will put up numbers that were above where he was in his final season in Green Bay. All right, the receiving numbers, we will go. We'll start with Garrett Wilson. I have him catching 64% of his targets, 175 targets, 112 receptions, which would be a Jets record, by the way, 1,326 yards. That would put him 3rd all-time in a Jets season in receiving yards, only behind Brandon Marshall's incredible 2015 season and a Don Maynard season. 9 receiving touchdowns, 11.8 yards per reception, and 78 yards per game. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be far and away the Jets' leading receiver. I know some want to see him like well over 1,500 receiving yards. He has the talent to do it. I think the Jets are going to be more of a run-heavy team, which which is something that I mentioned here. But moral of the story is I think we would all sign up for a 1,300-yard receiving season and close to 10 touchdowns. We just don't see that very often from Jets players. Like, this would go down as a top 3 Jets receiving season. And Garrett Wilson would get paid handsomely after that season. I think Breece Hall ends up being the team's second leading receiver. I have him catching 67 of 90 targets for 631 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, 9.4 yards per reception, and 37.1 yards per game. I think Tyler Conklin has a more productive season than he did a year ago. He had more receiving yards than what I'm predicting, but more mouths to feed in this offense than a year ago, and significantly more receiving touchdowns. So I'll say 59 catches on 78 targets for 561 yards, 5 touchdowns, 9.5 yards per reception, and 33 yards per game. Mike Williams, I think, comes on slow at the beginning of the year, is better down the stretch, but finishes with 40 catches, 608 yards, 5 touchdowns. I think some are hoping that he's going to be a 800-yard number 2 receiver. I think he has the talent to do it. Once again, unfortunately, it's a good problem to have, but I just think there's so many guys who are going to be catching passes this year. It's really hard to get these numbers to even out to where you might want them to be. Xavier Gipson, I have catching 18 passes, 221 yards, no touchdowns, 13 yards per game. Malachi Corley, I know we're all curious to see what he ends up doing. I have him at 31 receptions, 291 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I think he starts the year very, very slow. I think the second half of the year is when we see him start to be implemented a little bit more. I think fans will be concerned with his season, but I think in the second half of the year, he will show signs of growth, and that'll leave us optimistic going into year 2 and him potentially getting a bigger role. Alan Lazard, 22 catches, 224 yards, 10.2 yards per reception, and 13.2 yards per game is where I'm going to have him. Jason Brownlee, he's on the practice squad right now, but I think he'll get elevated as that last receiving option as a wide receiver. I'll go 3 catches, 22 yards. He features in. Jeremy Ruckert, 17 catches, 164 yards. He gets in the end zone with a touchdown, by the way. And Braylon Allen will have a few catches as well. I put him down for 7 for 44, and that's how I got to my 4,092 receiving yards. As I mentioned, for the New York Jets, rushing is going to be the way of this team. They will be a run-first team, in my opinion. Here are the numbers, and I'll let you know where they rank for these teams. So we'll start Breece Hall, 275 rushing attempts, 1,403 yards. So yes, if you add his receiving yards in there, he has over 2,000 all-purpose yards, 5.1 yards per attempt, 82.5 yards per game, 12 rushing touchdowns on the year, a monster year for Breece Hall. Braylon Allen, though, he'll be utilized a lot. I think we'll be excited about the season. He has 146 attempts, 672 rushing yards, 4.6 yards per attempt, and 5 rushing touchdowns. He'll get a lot of work down on the goal line. If you're a Breece Hall fantasy owner, you might get a little frustrated by Braylon Allen stealing some touchdowns. Isaiah Davis, I'm going to go 34 attempts, 146 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers, 35 attempts, 130 yards, just scrambling a little bit. And he'll rush into the end zone 1 time. He doesn't run as much as he did early on in his career, but I think we see down by the goal line a little play action and have him scamper in on a little bootleg action. As I mentioned, second half, that's when we see Malachi Corley. He'll get some touches on some ends around and maybe even out of the backfield, but I'll go 19 attempts, 89 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. So he finishes his rookie season with 4 total touchdowns. Here's where that would rank the Jets, by the way, if, based on last year's numbers. The total numbers here, 509 attempts, 2,439 yards, which would be second in the NFL based on last year. Yards per attempt, 4.8 would be fourth. Yards per game, 143.5, which would be second. And 22 rushing touchdowns would rank them 11th. So that's a very, very productive rushing offense, which I think is going to carry this team. All right, to the defense we go. Let's start with the defensive line. Quinnen Williams, I'm going to have him 8.5 sacks, 72 pressures, playing 68% of snaps, 68 tackles, 10 tackles for a loss, and a forced fumble. I think he's just, again, really solid. Top 3 interior defensive linemen in the league. Hassan Reddick, I'll say he plays 15 games this year, 9 sacks, 61 pressures, 60% of snaps, 34 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 5 tackles for a loss. Jermaine Johnson has an improved season as well. He goes up to 8 sacks this year, 58 pressures. He plays 66% of snaps this year, 51 tackles. Javon Kinlaw, I think, ends up being the starter next to Quinnen Williams and will play 52% of snaps, 4.5 sacks for him, 38 pressures, 5 tackles for a loss. What does Will McDonald do this year? I think this is really the big question. I have him playing 42% of snaps, so a big increase. That's more than double his snap percentage from a year ago. And I have him finishing with 5.5 sacks. I think we will look at this as a productive pass rush season for Will McDonald and much more hope going into year 3. 2 forced fumbles as well. He is going to be a strip sack artist. Leaky Fotu, don't expect a ton out of, 28% of snaps, 2 sacks, 15 pressures. He'll be better against the run, more of a run defending guy, I think. Michael Clemens, I'll say he plays 34% of snaps, 2 sacks, 12 pressures. 2 tackles for a loss. Solomon Thomas, his snap percentage is going to go down this year, in my opinion. 2.5 sacks, 31% of snaps. Leonard Taylor gets some action. I'll say he plays 26% and gets 1.5 sacks and 12 pressures. And then Braden McGregor, 16%, 1 sack, 8 pressures. So that is 44.5 sacks from the defensive line, which is a really big increase from where they were a year ago on just the D-line. So we'll get to some linebackers, and I think one of the safeties gets a couple of sacks, but really, really productive pass rush season from this defensive line, especially when Hassan Reddick finally reports, and he will. Like I said, I don't think he plays this week against the 49ers. It feels way too late for that, but I do think we see him at some point, and he plays roughly 15 games. To the linebackers we go. CJ Mosley, 1.5 sacks, 141 tackles, 16 missed tackles, 6 tackles for a loss, and a forced fumble. Just a very, very solid, productive season still. Is he the elite of the elite at this point in his career? No, he's not. But what I will say is that his football IQ really carries him. He's the leader on that defense. He's a captain for a reason. CJ is a special talent, and Quincy Williams right there with him, one of the best linebacker duos in the NFL. 3 sacks, 16 missed tackles, 150 tackles, 12 tackles for a loss. That will lead the team, and 3 forced fumbles. Quincy builds off of his really, really impressive 2023 season with the Jets and has yet another impressive season, and likely is due for another big contract after this year, as he would have one more year left at making pennies on the dollar for what he actually is worth. Jamien Sherwood will get some playing time. I have him at 42 tackles. Zaire Barnes, I think, works his way in slightly. I'll give you some Zaire Barnes numbers. I'll say 18 tackles for him. He'll be more of a special teamer if and when he plays. Don't expect a ton out of him, but figured I'd give you some numbers there. For the corner room, I'll give you who my top 4 corners are going to be. I think it's Gardner, Reed, Michael Carter, and Quantez Stigger. So those will be the 4 guys I give you stat predictions for. Sauce Gardner, I think he gets 4 interceptions this year. He had 1 his rookie year and 0 last year, so that is a really big improvement. I think teams are going to be forced to throw on the Jets a little bit more, and that's when he is able to take advantage of that. So he will also have 59 tackles. He'll allow 260 receiving yards and just 1 touchdown. That would be a monster season, by the way, and 55% completion percentage against. DJ Reed, I think, still has a productive year, but I think takes a little bit of a step back from where he was a year ago. I have him at 1 pick, 66 tackles, 510 yards against, and 4 touchdowns against, 64.3 completion percentage when targeted. Michael Carter, I think, will have a very solid season, 51 tackles, 302 yards allowed, 2 picks, 1 touchdown allowed, a 58.2 completion percentage against. And Quantez Stiggers, in his limited role, I think will have 1 pick, 17 tackles, 38 yards against, and a 62.3 completion percentage. Finally, let's go to safety. Chuck Clark, 2 sacks, 1 interception, 94 tackles, 301 yards against, 2 touchdowns, 68.2 completion. I think he ends up being an upgrade over what we saw last year and the last 2 years from Jordan Whitehead. Might not get as many interceptions as him, but I think is more consistent all around and is significantly better against the run. Tony Adams, I think, has an okay season. 2 interceptions, 77 tackles, 287, 3 touchdowns, and a 65.2 completion. And Ashton Davis, he always finds his way into some turnovers. So I'll give him 2 interceptions, no touchdowns allowed, 128 receiving yards allowed on top of that. Okay, so now it's time for my New York Jets record prediction and what the standings look like in the AFC East. Okay, I have the New York Jets finishing the 2024 season with a record of 11-6. I think an 11-6 season would be a huge upgrade. That would be 4 more wins than what we saw a year ago. Some are more optimistic than that. I've seen some predict 15 wins. I've seen some say 13 wins. I think a lot of people are falling on 12 wins for the New York Jets, and I think that's a possibility. I'll give you my floor and ceiling. My floor is 10, and my ceiling for this team is 13 wins. I think that's the range we see them at. And the reason why I'm going 11-6 is because I think there's going to be a random game in there that the Jets lose that they're not supposed to. That happens a lot in the NFL. Some examples of games that I think could be potential trap games for the Jets. The Minnesota game in London, I think, is potentially a tough one. Those games are just always so weird. Should they beat the Vikings? They are significantly better than the Vikings, yes. But I think that's going to be a sneaky, tough game. Also, I think the game on Sunday Night Football against the Steelers on the road in Pittsburgh is a sneaky, tough game. Would you consider Houston a trap game? I just think Houston's going to be a really good team. I have that one as a loss. I have the 49ers game as a loss. And then I think I split with the Dolphins and the Bills, and that's how I get to 6 losses there. So 11-6. But is that good enough to win the division? This year, I think yes. I have the Jets winning their first division since 2002 at 11-6 and being the 4 seed in the AFC. The Jets have not won the division. I've been watching the New York Jets. I was born in 95, so I'm not young enough, or I'm too young, I guess, to remember 98 really. The first year I truly feel like I knew what was going on was 2003, which is the year after they last won the division. I can't really claim 2002. I remember some guys from that era, but again, like watching week in and week out and knowing what was going on. So I claim 03. So that's a long time. I've been watching 20 years of Jets football and have yet to see them win a division. This year, I think that changes at 11-6. The Dolphins I have at 10-7 and being the 6th seed. Again, I think the Jets and Dolphins split. I think the Dolphins start hot. I think they cool off in the second half. That's kind of the recipe that we've seen from them the last couple of years. Injuries have played a factor in that as well. But I think the Dolphins had some key losses on the offensive line this year. And we'll see how they're able to compete. But I do think they are a playoff team. There's too much talent offensively. I think the Bills take a pretty significant step back, but still make the playoffs. I have them in 3rd at 9-8 and finish as the 7th seed in the AFC. There's been a lot of turnover on that defense. Wide receiver room looks completely different. Allen's an alien and probably will drag that team to a playoff spot, even though I think their roster is taking a significant step back. But I think the Jets and Dolphins are better all-around teams than the Buffalo Bills. And finally, in 4th place, this one will make you feel good. The New England Patriots finish 4-13. Tough season for New England. Things you just absolutely hate to see. Okay, so let's go into my playoff predictions. So I picked every game, which then gave me results. So if you want to see that, I'll post my full predictions on Twitter. But here's the matchup that it ended up being for the Jets in the first round. I had the Bengals as the 5 seed coming into MetLife Stadium as the Jets host their first playoff game since 2002. First home playoff game in that building at MetLife Stadium. And I have the Jets beating the Cincinnati Bengals in the wild card round, which would be a really nice, impressive win. I know that, again, I'm predicting the Bengals as a wild card team, but I think the Ravens and Bengals both are like 12-win teams. And, the AFC North, there's been many years where they produce a wild card team as like the 5th seed that's at like 11 or 12 wins. And I think the Bengals are one of them this year, but I think the Jets get it done. So divisional round, Jets match up against the Kansas City Chiefs, two-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. It'd be okay for them to bow out this year, right? Like that's the spot. Kansas City's just been better. They had the first round bye. They were the 1 seed. Jets going on the road to face the 1 seed. Jets win. Jets beat the Kansas City Chiefs. They knock them off and are going to the AFC Championship game. Party like it's 2010. Jets, Ravens, AFC Championship game on the road in Baltimore. Number 2 seed, Baltimore Ravens. Joe Douglas, can he beat his former team? Is Matt going to be a homer and pick the Jets to win everything this year? Unfortunately, this is where I have the Jets run coming to an end. I had the Baltimore Ravens over to the Jets. Jets season ends in the AFC Championship game. And then I have the 49ers over the Ravens in the Super Bowl. The last few Super Bowls, it feels like there's been a repeat vibe. And like it's teams that have matched up before in the Super Bowl. We had the 49ers and the Chiefs. We've had recently the Rams and the Patriots after they met. We had the Patriots and the Eagles after they met a while ago. Like, I just feel like there's been some Super Bowls in recent memory that have been games between teams who have met up before in the Super Bowl. And in 2012, the Niners and Ravens met up. Ravens got the better of them, but this time I think it would be the 49ers who get the better of the Ravens. Kyle Shanahan finally gets his Super Bowl. So is that enough to be considered a successful New York Jets season? I say yes. That means Aaron Rodgers is coming back for 2025, which I think was in play here. And that truly will be the one last ride, in my opinion. But I would sign up for this season. I want to hear from you guys, though. What are your predictions? If you think the Jets are winning the Super Bowl, that's fine. Tell me why down below in the comments. If you think they'll be better than what I predicted, let me know. If you think they'll be worse, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? All that, let me know down below in the comments. I'm Matt O'Leary. Catch you next time.